Welcome back to Unsolicited Advice, brought to you by Toxic Bubblegum. I'm Bubblegum.
I'm Toxic.
And today we're talking about weapons.
Because they're great.
Because they're fun, and I've been watching Forged in Fire again.
Yes.
Who doesn't love Forged in Fire? Most people don't know what that is.
I was going to say, most people probably don't even know what that is.
It's a real cool show. We'll talk about it later.
Yes.
But for right now, Kat has a quote.
I do. Even the finest sword plunged into salt water will eventually rust.
That's by Sun Tzu.
Yes. The Art of War.
Ooh, we get real far back in our media segment.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I'm going to call the Art of War a media segment.
Oh, it's a media segment.
It's media.
That's my one-line review of the Art of War.
Very nice.
We're going to be mixing things up. Our media segment is going to be incorporated into our advice today, so you're going to be getting advice all the way through. And with that, just going to launch into part one.
Alright, so part one is just a short weaponry 101 section for everybody.
Yeah.
So weapons are important, if often overlooked area of world building that we're going to be talking about. So while they have something that you don't need to have a heavy focus on, they're a good way to add depth and originality to your project with just a little bit of extra forethought.
There are some genres and some mediums that place a higher importance on weapons, but today we're just going to be doing a general overview of what makes a weapon memorable, in a good way. We're mostly going to be covering good things today instead of bad things, and how you can work that seamlessly into your story. So it's weaponry in regards to world building.
I also feel like I'm getting trolled because there's a warning here
I wrote a warning into our notes
that I have to read because it's in pink.
Yeah.
So,
I figured you could warn people.
I'm going to be getting very dramatic.
You don't
about
have
this.
to read it verbatim, but you should because there are a lot of Game of Thrones references in
Oh,
there.
okay. Alright, well then I'm going to read it verbatim. I'm going to do it very dramatically
Nice.
in my dramatic voice.
Oh.
This is my dramatic voice. Winter is coming. Sorry, I have to say, warning. Winter is coming. We are 1 month away from the last season of Game of Thrones, and Kat has her HBO subscription back. So from this day until the end of her days, she will be making extra Game of Thrones references in her media segments. Thank you for your understanding. Oh, sorry, I have to read this verbatim. Thank you for your understanding. And seven say you, Valar Morghulis.
Valar Dohaeris. It doesn't say that. I said that because I like Game of Thrones.
The beans.
Well, actually, no.
No.
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about? But yeah.
Yeah.
So that was my. I hope you liked my dramatic.
It's a
reading.
nice dramatic voice.
Yeah, thank you. I tried really hard. I didn't come up with that on the fly whatsoever at all.
Nice.
Thank you.
Alan was up practicing his dramatic voice.
I was. I saw that last night and I was like,
for that segment exclusively.
"Get why are you doing this to me?"
Yeah, I was like, when I started on the weapons notes, I had a bunch of things prepared so it would be diverse, and then I got my HBO subscription back, and now I just want to talk about Game of Thrones, and I'm going to. So that's where we're at.
All right, cool. So we're gonna move right into part two, then, because it's all about weapons.
Mm-hmm. So our first piece of advice, think of weapons like you would think of characters, because a lot of the characteristics that would make your characters great are things that will also make a weapon great and memorable in the story. And we're going to get into the specifics of that. Alan's going to start us off.
So the first thing to consider is backgrounds. So every weapon has a history of its own and stories that go with them. And Kat has an example of this. So this is like something that, like, where did your weapon come from?
Mm-hmm.
Where has it been before, if it was anywhere before, or is it brand new?
Yeah. And a good example for this is Harry Potter's wand, actually. Notice me not talking about Game of Thrones. Harry Potter's wand, because wand makers get very into the history of where wands and stuff come from, and each wand is very unique, specifically made with magic, and the wand that Harry Potter gets has a phoenix feather in it. There was only one other phoenix feather ever donated from that specific phoenix, and it was Lord Voldemort's wand.
Oh.
So it was like, that's one of the first things that you get to learn about Lord Voldemort, or Harry's wand specifically.
two of the same in different hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're all going downhill with the Game of Thrones references.
Yeah.
So the next thing to consider is the cultural influence. So diversity is important. We say this all the time on the back card. Even in a 100% fictional setting, you're gonna have different cultures. Different cultures have different takes on violence and use weapons that reflect their culture and how those views on violence.
Yeah. So an example of this is in season 1 of Game of Thrones, Ser Jorah sits down with one of Khal Drogo's blood riders, and they have a discussion about Erics versus longswords, and which one is more effective. An Eric is a curved blade that the Dothraki use because it's easier to be swung from the back of a horse, which is considered one of the more honorable ways to go down in battle in Dothraki culture, whereas Ser Jorah uses a longsword because it's designed to pierce plate mail, which is common in Westeros. That's like the typical battle situation, and the Blood Rider points out that Dothraki don't wear any kind of armor because it's considered cowardly. Right. So, and they sit down and they have that discussion, and you can just see not only where the weapons differ because of cultures, but where the philosophies tie in.
Mm. It's good. It's nice. We like to learn. It's a nice way to do some world building.
Yeah.
Which we will get into later. So the next point we have is emotional impact. A weapon should enhance the emotional value of at least one aspect of your story.
And the example that I'm going to use here is Ice, which is Eddard Stark's bastard longsword. It's this giant Valyrian steel sword that has been passed down from Stark to Stark for generations. And I think one of the absolute saddest moments of the show, Ice gets melted down by the Lannisters who beheaded Ned Stark. And it's just... you get like a little pre-scene at the beginning of every season, and season 4 just starts with the sword getting melted down into 2 new Lannister blades.
Fuck you, Lannisters.
I considered it one of the saddest deaths of the show, and it's like, it's a weapon.
But see, so it had such a strong story importance, or it had such an importance to the characters that you felt for, that seeing something that isn't even, it's like losing a family heirloom, basically. Because that's sad.
It's a sad scene. And if you write weapons correctly, that's the kind of response you should evoke from your audience when a weapon like that is lost. So,
and the next point is development. Not unlike living things, weapons can be strengthened or weakened. It's entirely possible a weapon is not the same at the end of the story as it was at the beginning. Amazing.
Here's my really trolly example. I'm going to talk about Binding of Isaac.
Ooh.
Which I think is an interesting choice because it's a game where you have very unconventional weapons anyway, because you fend off the monsters with your tears. You play as a small child and you basically cry on enemies. But I also chose it because each of the upgrades, quote unquote, can either make your tiers better or worse, and they all have significant impact onto the storytelling. They're usually like religious relics that will have an effect. So it's like one of the things in Binding of Isaac is you can get a crown of thorns. You can get the Jesus crown, and it makes you cry tears of blood.
Jesus.
So which it increases your damage, but then there are other things in Wrath of Lamb or in Afterbirth, they have like the Ludovico method, which is actually a Clockwork Orange reference, but you get to control you get one giant tier that you get to control independently of your character.
God.
And it's just, they have like little references in there, and they can have an impact. So by the time you get to the end, you've picked up all of these like bits of symbolism throughout the game that have had an impact on how you fight.
See, I was going to... So, when I was trying to guess things in our pre-show, I saw this. I saw the example as B-O-L. Oh! Because it's a capital I, and I was like, what the fuck Game of Thrones sword is that? Bull! It's a bull!
That's what the mountain men use.
Bull! Bull!
Shagga, son of Dolph, use bull!
It's Thundergore. Here for those tasty references to our D&D campaign.
Yeah, so, next point, secrets from horrible histories to hidden powers, weapons can have a lot to hide.
So my example for this, we're going classic mode on the podcast, spoilers for the Adventure Zone.
Nice.
So Taco has, his, wand, which is, it's called the Umbra Staff, and it's his umbrella wand. And you find out, later in the series that the Umbra Staff actually was created by his twin sister in order to help contain the light of the universe and hide it from the ever-encroaching darkness that's trying to consume it. And in the twists and turns of fate, she was actually locked inside the Umbra Staff and has been trying to communicate with him through casting her own power through the staff into the outside world. Like, there's a scene where he's just had a date with the Grim Reaper, and he senses that there's a lich nearby, and he's looking around and he's like, you're not a lich, Taco, obviously. Is there one nearby? And he's like looking around, and Loop hears that and is like, oh no, this guy's gonna find me and take me away from my brother. So she tries to incinerate him by casting through the staff. But so it's just like one of those things where it's like you find out this huge thing about the Umbra Staff, and it ties all these weird things that have happened to beforehand into one thing, and it's really cool.
Nice.
I like it. That's my favorite. I like the Umbra Staff.
I'm glad that you used the umbrella thing, because if I had done the example for that, I was planning to use Hagrid's umbrella.
Hey!
Nice.
We're both making umbrella references.
Umbrellas are on theme today. So, interactions. A big part of personality comes in with interactions. A character will form a bond with their weapon, whereas other characters may not have that same affinity with that weapon, and it should show.
So my example for this one is, and I'm gonna mispronounce this because I was trying to figure out how to pronounce it, and Kat was not helpful.
Sushi.
It's not sushi. It's I believe it's pronounced shusui, and it's one of Zoro's swords from One Piece. So when we first meet the sword, it's in the hands of a different swordsman, and who is a zombie, and they have a duel, and then you later find out that this sword has been with the zombie swordsman. It was with him in life and in death, so they had a really close bond, but when Zoro defeats him, he's like, take this blade, you deserve to wield it, before he dies completely. But then when Zoro picks up the blade, he is not attuned to it. Mm-hmm. And so he has it's harder for him to wield, and he can't harness its full potential. But then throughout the big time skip that they do where everyone gets stronger, he goes through really rigorous training with the sword. So by the end of it, he can wield it just as easily as he did his other swords. And he can also use it to do things like cut boats in half, which is a pretty big deal.
I mean, that's a cool thing.
But yeah, so I thought that was a good example of, getting a weapon that someone else could harness really well, and then being like,
yeah,
I can't do that well, as it turns out. But then you do.
Yeah.
And then Zoro still has 3 swords.
Nice.
Yeah. There's my little One Piece reference for William and Ben.
So consistency, like with any element of a story, there should be a reasonable amount of consistency to how a weapon functions and to how much power it has.
So I had to dig way back in my memory banks for this one. My example is the Tessaiga from Inuyasha, one of my first animes. And so, the Tessaiga, you see a lot of, the balancing of power with, the sword. It's a sword that Inuyasha, wields, but you know there's a lot of hidden potential behind it. So the legend about the Tetsaiga is it can kill 100 demons in one sweep of the sword. But when he gets it, he has no idea how to do that. And so you're wondering, can it really do that? How do you do that? And we're not really sure if it can live up to that potential until we see someone else do it, who is a stronger swordsman. It's until Sesshomaru does it, and is able to really harness it. And after it happens, Inuyasha still deals with trying to make it happen. And then eventually, once he figures it out, once he reaches that level of potential, like himself as a swordsman, he's able to activate the demon killing blow himself, and you sort of see it get stronger as Inuyasha becomes stronger. But there's always a very level of consistency with what the Tetsaiga can do and what it cannot do.
Yeah.
It has a groundwork of rules that it has to follow in order to be activated, basically.
Right. Which is good. That's what you want.
Right.
That's
It's also a really cool looking sword. I like it.
All right.
I think it's big and anime.
Nice.
Yeah. So now we're going to move on to the next bullet point of advice, which is weaponry is a great way to strengthen and enforce other elements of your story. It helps to build out the world.
It's good. And starting with world building or setting, weapons are a great way to show diversity in a large setting or beliefs and rituals on a small scale setting.
So my example for this is I picked Pacific Rim.
Nice.
Because I wanted to talk about the Jaegers.
Mm-hmm.
In the first Pacific Rim, there's the big battle at the Kaiju Wall with the 3 still active Jaegers in that territory. So there's the ones I'm going to talk about are Gypsy Danger, which is our main one that is piloted by Rally and by Mako. And then there is
Gispy Danger.
Gispy Danger. That's how it's spelled. I'll take it. And then Red Typhoon, which is the 3-pilot Pacific Rim Jaeger, because we're still talking about Pacific Rim. I didn't need to say that again. I'm gonna say it like 10 more times.
All right.
So it sort of gives you a little idea of so the Jaegers are piloted through the Mind Link system that they have, going down the rabbit hole. Not going down the rabbit hole. You can't go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah,
that's what it is. It's been a while since I've seen Pacific Rim.
The drift compatibility.
Drift compatibility. Look, you know my example better than I do.
Just really like Pacific Rim.
That's because it's so good. But so, yeah, it's a great way to show diversity because they have completely different fighting styles with the Jaegers. So the Red Typhoon is a 6-armed martial arts fighting robot. Because it has 3 pilots as opposed to the usual 2, because all 3 brothers are drift compatible, so they can all use it to fight together. And so you see a lot of because it's the Chinese robot, so it uses a lot of Chinese martial arts in the fighting style, whereas with Gypsy Danger, it has the cannons. This is what I was thinking, because the cannons instantly cauterize kaiju, and so it has the launchers used for the plasma gun, but it also has 2 swords that were outfitted by Mako. Specifically, she wanted those swords on there to reflect her fighting style. And I think it's really good. It sort of, you see the different cultures of the people who are piloting the Jaegers, as well as the cultural influences, and it sort of gives you, because we don't really go anywhere outside of the Kaiju Wall, but you do get a glimpse of this bigger world just through seeing those Jaegers.
And it's a good example because it's speculative fiction, but it's based off of a real environment.
Right.
So there are a lot of parallels that you can draw from things that are familiar.
Right. There is also a third one. It's the the Cherno Alpha. I didn't think that one did as much, because we didn't see quite as much of the Russian pilots. We know they're husband and wife. It does just a lot of fucking punching, which is fun.
Yeah.
But I didn't quite think that it showed the same level of diversity in the world as the Gypsy Danger versus Red Typhoon dichotomy. But it is there.
It's definitely there.
And it punches shit. So yeah.
Yeah.
So now we're moving on to the character creation aspect. And a weapon for a character says a lot about who that person is.
Yeah. And my example for this is going to be Oathkeeper. Ice gets melted down into the two blades, and one is given to the king as a wedding present, and the other one is given to the king's uncle. And the king's uncle is having kind of like a crisis of faith, where he doesn't really feel like he's worthy of the sword, and he feels bad about the origins of the sword, because his family did this terrible thing to get enough steel to make it. So he gives it to the woman who escorted him to the capital, because she's honorable and he thinks that she's more worthy of the blade, and he gives it to her because she's everything that he wants the sword to stand for that it doesn't yet. He gives it to Brienne of Tarth, who's just amazing on her own.
Oh, Brienne of Tarth.
And she refuses the sword at first because she doesn't want to work for the Lannisters, because she served Lady Catelyn Stark, but he tells her that Ned Stark's old blade should be used to try and protect Ned Stark's daughters. So she takes the blade under that guise because she's honorable, and because even though Lady Catelyn's dead, she's still trying to honor the vows that she made to Lady Catelyn in defending the Stark daughters. And it's named Oathkeeper because that's what Brienne is known for, is like keeping her vows above all else and being very honorable. So it's a good one because it shows not only what kind of person Brienne is when she takes it, but also it shows what kind of person Jaime wants to be when he gives it away. And it's good.
It's good. It's a fun time. And nobody's sad at all.
Yeah.
So the next point is real world influence. So you probably have a couple elements of the real world in your story somewhere. Probably. Maybe. So weaponry is a great way to contrast and compare the like real life influence versus what you have in your story.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
And a good example of this is, again, in Game of Thrones, we have different kinds of steel here in the real world, and we have different kinds of steel in Westeros, and in Essos also. You get to see there's a difference between, like, a wildling who doesn't have proper equipment forging a sword up north of the wall, and castle forged steel, which is done by, like, professional smiths south of the wall. And then you get more into, which is pretty accurate, if you are making raw steel from scratch somewhere, and you're not a smith, it might not be, or even if you're like a self-trained smith, it's not going to be the best.
Right.
But like if you have refined steel and you know what you're doing, you can make like really cool stuff a lot easier, and it's going to hold an edge better. So that's something, it's very based in real world, but then we get into the more fantastical elements because Valyrian steel gets passed down and reworked because it has spells and enchantments worked into it, and it's something that you just see Valyrian steel being referred to, and even before it becomes super relevant to the plot, you get kind of an understanding of the culture of old Valyria and the fantastical elements that it represents.
It's pretty.
It's very pretty.
I like when things are pretty.
Good.
Yay!
This is Alan's new podcast voice, everybody.
Hello. It's like that when Gordon Ramsay is impersonating an old lady.
Yeah.
That's my new voice.
All right.
Forever.
Nice.
Hello. That's all I got.
All right.
And then this is our this is our third major bullet point, is to scale your things appropriately.
Yeah. So make sure that the weapon physics are appropriate for the piece, be they realistic, absurd, or anywhere in between. This applies to both weapon design and usage. We talked about consistency in weapons, and this is just making your weapon consistency consistent with the other tone of your piece.
Right. So I'm gonna take a little detour off from our TV show references. I'm going to go back to video games, as you did with Binding of Isaac. And talk about Doom 2016. Because, so, Doom is a very weapon-based game, obviously. And a lot of the things you get are very cool to use. And Doom is set in a futuristic setting, obviously, because you're on Mars, there are demons everywhere, you got some cool power armor. So Doom strikes this very sci-fi vibe while also being super gritty. And I think the weapons in their design match that grittiness, while incorporating a couple sci-fi elements into them. Like, you have a lot of, it's like laser ammo. You use a couple of actual bullets, but you're mostly shooting lasers. And so, they incorporate the grittiness into the design of the weapons. The ammunition can go back and forth, but there are certain weapons that are more science fiction-y, like the plasma cannon or the BFG 9000, which we all love, which are more sci-fi-y, because they have greater potential that our weapons can't reach. But more classic weapons like the shotgun or the machine gun are more classically, they kind of work back to regular influence of a human culture. And there's just a lot of scalage to them because you get them at different points in the game. And the designs also reflect the destructiveness of the thing. Like the BFG 9000 looks like it's gonna fucking kill a room full of enemies, and that's exactly what it does, and it's very satisfying. You want your things to look nice, and while also striking all the right chords, from ammunition to the actual destructiveness. Doom's coming out this year. I'm excited.
So that also sort of adds another thing, and we're not covering it today. One day, where if you're using a medium that has an interactive aspect, your weapons really should. There has to be that extra degree of functionality where like using a BFG has to be satisfying. You have to feel like you got some kind of gratification using a big weapon like that.
You didn't fight your way through a million zombies to get just another regular gun. You get a big gun. A big fucking gun, if you will.
And our last two bullet points, we're not going to do media examples for. We're just going to kind of give you advice. And this is our good, all-encompassing, these are good tips for writing anything, and it applies to weapons kind of advice. So starting with research, there's a higher suspension of disbelief already in place for speculative fiction. Use it, but don't misuse it. Get the fundamentals down before adding fantastical elements. Like we talked about, there should be some kind of basic consensus for what can and cannot happen in your environment. Whether that's something ridiculous and fun because you're doing something kind of silly and weird, or whether it's something more serious,
If you're doing, like, a realistic, sort of story, you can't have an anime weapon in there. Everybody loves anime weapons, but you can't put that in a gritty, realistic piece. Sad as it is.
Very sad. But, like, if you're just having a fun time, if you're making Xena, go for it. Like, go all out on the silly... like, have fun with it, if it's appropriate.
And
functionality, in a visual context is something I also wanted to cover. Sometimes aesthetics take priority over functionality, and this is very dangerous, especially when you're working with weapons. If you're drawing or designing something, make sure that it's believable. And this kind of ties into the anime weapon thing. There's like a lot of cool stuff that you see in weapon designs that adds absolutely no purpose to the weapon.
Right.
And very seldom are blacksmiths like, hey, this isn't gonna be functional, but it's gonna look cool. Like, you wanna, in theory, every part of a weapon should be functional.
Right. It's like, on the latest episode of Forge and Fire I was watching,
the latest one Alan was watching. Not the latest episode.
Definitely not the latest episode. But the last one I watched, was, I can't remember the name of it, but it had a blade, and then it was a Shaolin monk weapon.
Mm-hmm.
So it had a regular blade,
mm-hmm.
And then it had a crescent handle,
mm-hmm.
That could also be used as a blade to block weapons, and then it also had a little tiny dagger on the end.
Yeah.
It was functional as shit.
But there's another episode where they have, like, the horns that are on in the back.
Yeah.
That clatter, and they threw the weight off. So even though they looked cool, points were deducted for...
Right. So it's important to make your thing design for function first, and if you can incorporate aesthetic elements afterwards, that's what you should do.
Right.
That's the best way to create a good weapon.
And the last sub-point here is that research can be fun. Something that I would recommend that we're going to get to in recommendations, I turned Alan onto this, like, really weird show that I stumbled across called Forged in Fire.
I love Forged in Fire so much.
Which
with Will Wilson.
With Will Willis.
Will Willis. Oh, it's even better.
Will Willis with the man bun. Have you gotten to the season where he has the man bun yet?
No, he's still wearing his hair
it.
down right now.
Okay. He looks so silly with the man bun.
He's so cute.
He's so silly anyway. I love it. Yeah, I found this weird show. It's streaming on Hulu. It's called Forged in Fire, and it's a competition show for blacksmiths. And it... all joking aside and reality show fun nonsense aside, they have, like, it's on the History Channel.
Yeah.
Because they get into the historical influences on a different weapon every week during their finale, and it's really good. Research doesn't have to be one of those grueling experiences where you're, like, in the library poring over old books, which I also think is fun, but you don't have to do it. And, you know, ideally, maybe you shouldn't get all of your research from reality television, but if you're not particularly interested in a topic, there are ways to spark that interest that don't necessarily have to be traditional research outlets.
Right. There's a lot of YouTube channels that do blacksmithing.
Yeah.
Like
that make, like, fantasy.
Yeah,
like,
they do, like, the fantasy weapons. Like, there's tons of YouTube channels out there that do these sort of not just prop making, but actual forging, and then seeing how they work.
Yeah.
So, because I know, like, there's just so many.
Right.
I don't watch any of them, because I'm not currently looking at weapon design for any of my stuff, but they are out there. They've been recommended to me, and if you Google weapon blacksmithing on YouTube, you gotta find something. So yeah, you don't have to you can have fun. Go have fun when you research.
And weapons are something, again, with the speculative fiction tie-ins, there's something you get a little bit more leeway, where you can make weapons sort of... You have to have that fundamental, like, these are the terms and this is, you know, the basics of weapons. But you can, like, play with stuff a little bit. A really good one, like, chakrams get messed with a lot, where it's a real weapon from India. It's pretty much like a round throwing knife is how they're used accurately, but you see a lot of inaccurate interpretations of them. Xeno being one, and Diablo 3 being, like, another large... Those aren't accurate to the chakram experience, but you can see the influence where they came from, and you can play with it from there, and it can be fun.
Right. Like, one of the things you can also do is go into your favorite game and look at the designs in there, or go to your favorite show and look at the weapon designs in there. it's fun.
Yeah.
You don't always have to think about it as research. You could just be chilling out, and you stumble on some research along the way. It's cool. It's nice. So our next set of bullet points is design and then edit. So first of all, you want to get a good grasp of any of the weapon that's important to your story, however you do that. So it could be writing the backstory first, it could be doing the design first, it could be putting it together with its character first, knowing the major plot points of it. You just sort of gotta... One of my things that I do when I'm designing things is I come up with scenes, like big scenes, usually independent of the story, that I then work in and help to shape it. So, like, if you have a big scene with a weapon, like, think that scene out and then sort of be like, okay, so how does this incorporate into the rest of the story? How can I make this work? How can I make this dynamic appear?
Yeah. Sort
of thing. So you gotta get a grasp on it. That's important. You always want to have a grasp on what you're doing. Then, as you're working in your piece, you can describe it as much and as often as you need to for consistency and clarity for yourself. So one of the things, there's a lot of talk about, like, editing, like, when you describe stuff, because nobody wants a paragraph-long description every single time. We're not in Charles Dickens. There's generally more of a push to sort of streamline things, but if you want to bring attention to a certain aspect of a weapon, describe it, because you want to bring attention to that, and if it's important to your story, you should bring attention to it, because that's going to help set clarity for you and also for your reader.
Yeah.
Because you are, in a book, you're painting an image.
Right.
And if you're, like, drawing something, use those close-ups. Show it off. Use your speech bubbles. But yeah, so make that happen. And then last, edit down to avoid redundancy. Nobody likes redundancy. That's just a fact. I feel like that one's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. And this is something I do when I'm... One of the things, just to, like, throw this out there, one of the things I do to get a good grasp of a weapon is I do play a lot of games. I start characters specifically with a weapon so I can see how it affects gameplay on a variety of different things. Because I don't use weapons that often. I'm not just like, I'm gonna pick up a short sword for a week and see how it differs. Like, so that's something that I do. And then, like, for describing it as much and often as I need to clarify for myself, this is, because I'm working on the Adventures book right now. Woohoo! And we had a lot of consistency issues in the podcast with the swing ring. Because everyone had a different idea of what the swing ring was, and then someone brought up Soul Calibur, and it's like, now it's the Soul Calibur thing, because that's too cool to back down from. But it was like really difficult, because in the podcast, like, how far you can reach and how effective a weapon is really dependent on roles. So in adapting it to the book, I've had to, it's like, this is the range of the swing ring, this is how far away Radley has to stand, this is how far she can reach with it. So it's like, in every swing ring fight, I, like, really describe, here's where she's at, this is where the swing ring is, this is how heavy it is, this is what it looks like, and I went really hard just so that, like, as I was editing, I could check to make sure, like, that's correct, this is physics, this is how it works. And it's like, there's a little bit, because again, it's kind of a ridiculous story, there's, like, a higher margin of error that I have, but that was, like, the first step that I did, where it was like, now I know where this is at. Now I know what, like, our book canon swing ring is. And then I went back and I edited so that not everyone had to hear how far away Radley was from every, like, fighter in
and
the
Radley
thing.
was 15 feet from the enemy.
She had to get exactly 10 and a half feet closer. Like, no one wants to read that, but it was helpful for me to have in a rough draft. That's why you do multiple drafts of stuff.
Right. It's also useful if you are working on a visual product, to use reference sheets.
Yeah.
Reference sheets are so important because you can write down things like the size of the weapon and what the range of the weapon is when someone's holding it, how long the usable length is, how the grasping part is. Generally, you can just have something that you can keep next to you while you're working to make sure you always draw it the same way or you describe it the same way.
Yeah.
I used to be really bad about doing reference sheets, and then I started doing them for classes, and I was like, I need to do reference sheets for everything all the time. Everybody gets a reference sheet. But yeah, because then also with your reference sheet, you can sort of see if you're over designing. Because if you have to draw something multiple times and you put a ridiculous amount of detail in it, you're going to have a hard time drawing that over and over again if it's in every single panel.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that.
You don't.
I mean, some people do that, and I mean, more power to them, but I don't have that kind of time. So, yeah. It's just useful.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah, so yeah. So I think we're ready to move on to our recommendation. Is that Game of Thrones?
It's Game of Thrones.
Oh my god, Kat.
That's actually not even the one that I'm going to recommend.
Oh.
Although also, pretty much from today until Game of Thrones ends, my battle cry is watch Game of Thrones. Do it.
Damn.
Watch it. Read A Song of Ice and Fire. A Song of Ice and Fire is a good example of not editing stuff down. If anyone is interested. Like, every time ice shows up, you hear about what colors are reflected in it, and you understand what the difference is between Valyrian and Castleforged steel. Like, it's not, the books are not edited quite as cleanly sometimes.
Damn.
As... At least with weapons, it comes up less frequently.
Well, that's nice.
You hear about what everyone is wearing all the time.
I was wearing a black corset with fish...
George R.R. Martin wrote My Immortal.
Hot take.
Yes.
That's
my
why we can never find the author of it.
That's what he's working on instead of finishing the series.
God damn it. Well, at least we'll get that final chapter.
Yeah. We'll get to know how that all ends. No.
She makes out with Voldemort. We have to stop talking about this. I hate that image.
Okay. But yeah, recommendations. Recommended Forged in Fire. It's really good if you don't understand the basics of weapons, because you can learn a lot just passively watching Forged in Fire. And then my media recommendation. Are you ready for this?
All right.
It's Adventure Time.
Come on, bring your friends.
Going to very distant lands. But go to those distant lands and look at the weapons, because they're great. Because I talked a little bit about personification of weapon at the beginning of this. That's the whole thing, is if you look at your weapon like a character, you'll know how to make it stronger and more memorable. Adventure Time takes that to a very literal place, because a lot of the weapons do have personalities, and my favorite of any of Finn's weapons, he gets the grass sword, which I really liked the history and the secret and like all of the... I loved everything that was going on with that sword, but it gets very literal because later down the line it grows a person, essentially, ends up so... It actually becomes the antagonist for a lot of the... So it takes that, like, personification of a weapon, and it's kind of symbolic at first, and then it gets very literal. So you can see the whole progression of it, and it's really good. Watch Adventure Time.
Come on. Bring your friends.
And then you'll have someone to cry together.
Right. Because Adventure Time gets fucking real.
Yeah.
Dudes. So I will also recommend Forged in Fire. It's real fun. It's real silly sometimes with Will Willis. But I mean, like, you do learn a lot about, like, making weapons and, like, histories of weapons, and it's just a ball and good time.
Yeah.
You just have fun watching it. And it's also one of those things that you can sort of, like, just have it on, and then when it gets to the parts that you want to listen to, you can listen to those and, like, watch the cute little animations they have.
Yeah.
Stuff that they do. And it's that easy. I'm trying to think. Like, for media recommendation, I mean, Game of Thrones. It's really good.
It's good.
I'll admit it. But I am probably gonna recommend something like Doom for my weapons recommendation. Because it does also give you a lot of catalogs of information about how the weapons were built, what they were designed for, and you can also just scroll through them, see all the different designs, see all the different uses, and also you get a big fucking gun at the end that's just fucking cool. So,
if anyone wants an example of the exact opposite of what we've been talking about this whole time, I seriously, if you can get your hands on, like, the Quake strategy guide from the 90s, here's my obscure, because it's funny. It's like, whoever wrote it had such a dark, fucked up sense of humor, but it's hilarious to read, which is not at all appropriate for the game, but it's great.
Damn. But yeah. I'd also recommend, if you feel like having a fun time, check out some Dungeons & Dragons stuff. There are a lot of weapons, that can range from, they have a lot of pre-made magical items, that have, like, various degrees of stuff going on. Some just have extra bonus to the, based on where they were, and some of them are just fucking sentient. That have fucking histories to them, just because, you can end up like me, Coin, who has changed his name because of his sword.
Yeah.
And it's great. We all have a good time. I'm not gonna eat anybody's brain or heart.
That's also a very, literal interpretation of personality for a weapon.
Right.
Is, Coin.
We love Coin. I love Coin. And
then this isn't a specific recommendation, but just to wrap us, just wrap it up, the recommendation segment, if there's anything that you really enjoy video game-wise, try playing your favorite game with a different weapon selection. That's actually how I learned a lot about, that's like what sparked my interest in weapons, was actually playing through Diablo 2 with different weapons, because each one had such a different feel. And that gameplay really is, it's a good simulation for the pros and cons of using different weapons. And it doesn't matter, like, what game it is, because any kind of fighting game usually has different kinds of weapons that you can use and experiment with. And
different builds, like, I mean, Diablo is the first one that comes to mind, because, I mean, that's the one that we play.
Yeah.
And it has so many different, like, builds that you can do. But I mean, like, sort of any MMO like that. I mean, like, World of Warcraft is another really big one, also by Blizzard, that has that sort of big range of weapons to choose from and build your character around. So yeah, just be sure to, like, if you enjoy something, there are a lot of ways that you can learn from it and get inspiration from it, get influenced. It's good. Okay, good. Bam! But yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, it's our advice podcast for the week. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Unsolicited Advice. I'm Bubblegum.
Valor Morghulis.
Fuck you, Cat. I'm not letting Cat back on the podcast. I'll see you later.
Listen to my Game of Thrones podcast.